The 21st century had started early. Thanks to commercial satellites, the world was shrinking. Improvement in communications and travel saw the world shift toward a global community. Specifically, it shifted toward a global market. Globalization was the new reality. You'd be hard-pressed to find a company as successful in the new global market as Nintendo. The success of the Nintendo Entertainment System was proof of their global dominance in their field. They would make the practice of third-party games a standard practice. This meant they could license local companies like EA to make American games on the Japanese console. By allowing third-party developers to pay them to make games for their console, they increased their global profits while also decreasing shovelware. This regulation meant games coming out of the NES met a certain level of standard. As a result, Nintendo would soon become synonymous with video games, like Coke with Cola. Even today, you can hear grandparents asking their grandkids about their Nintendos. The kids roll their eyes and explain that it's a PS4. This is a direct result of an aspect of globalization. Nintendo was helping spread its culture to the world. The culture of video games would be dominated by Nintendo for the next decade. While competitors eventually rose and eventually Nintendo faltered, the effect was a strong one. Mario is still one of the most recognized icons in the world. Now video games weren't just big industry, they were global industry. While Nintendo came to dominate video game culture, another company would dominate everyday life. Nike. It's everywhere. It is truly a global brand. From humble beginnings buying Japanese shoes to sell at track meets, this company grew to be one of the leading symbols of globalism. The company was based in the US, with most of its production done in the cheap overseas labor market. It marketed itself with an eye toward global branding. Even the swoosh was explicitly minimalist for places in the world that had no concept of the allusion to Nike, the goddess of victory. It sold itself as a lifestyle, particularly as an American lifestyle. And its vehicle was one man.
Do you know? That's right, Air Jordan, Air Jordan, Air Jordan.
Nike's success was a result of everything lining up perfectly. The world was opening up and becoming more global, allowing for more transnational companies like Nike to flourish. Improved communications meant it was easier for Nike to sell its particular brand of culture, and all of this was happening during the rise of the world's most marketable athlete, who Nike just so happened to sign. Michael Jordan became the face of not just Nike, but Americanization. His combination of talent, style, personality, smile, and drive made him the perfect representative of any company. Oh, and he played basketball. Soccer is the world's sport. The beautiful game is a language spoken nearly everywhere on the planet. But if soccer is Visa, basketball is Discover. Of the major sports associated with the US, basketball had the most organic global growth. And it started in the decade after Dr. James Naismith hung some peach baskets from the rafters. By the late 80s and early 90s, there were thriving leagues and basketball cultures across the Western world. So while the US was still lagging behind in soccer, the rest of the world had embraced basketball, making it easier for a basketball star to become the leading global icon. There was another factor too. Under the eye of David Stern, the NBA had become the cool league. Suddenly kids wanted to grow up to be ballers rather than ball players. This rise coincided with the rise of hip-hop, which had also become shorthand for cool. And in a trend all too familiar in history, black culture had become cool culture. Cultural appropriation was as American as apple pie, and black culture seemed to be the focal point for most of the last century. Jazz, dancing, rock and roll, they all saw black culture be appropriated for the larger masses. The same thing happened with hip-hop, only this time the artists and the message remained primarily black, and the same was true for the NBA. Only 20 years prior, many felt the NBA was too black to succeed. Now part of the league's appeal was its blackness, and Jordan was the perfect representation of that trend. He had the longest shorts, he wore the gold chains, he had the swagger, and the game. But he also had the charm, charisma, and intelligence to make sure he did nothing that made him seem threatening to anyone. And the companies came calling. Nike became a global phenomenon. McDonald's saw the potential Jordan provided, and Gatorade made us want to be like Mike. They were all successful because they sold a lifestyle to the world, the American lifestyle, and the world listened. As the story goes, David Stern was visiting China looking for expansion opportunities. While in a rural village, an old man came up and asked the interpreter who these men were. The interpreter said these men run the NBA. The old man looked puzzled until someone said the name Michael Jordan, at which point the old man smiled and said, "Ah, of the Red Oxen." Apocryphal? Maybe. But it was clear this marketing had made the NBA a major global player. It made a lot of people a lot of money, and it made Michael Jordan into maybe the most recognizable person on the planet. Nintendo and Jordan would collide in 1988 with Jordan vs. Bird one-on-one. This was EA's sequel to one-on-one basketball featuring Jordan's spiritual predecessor, Dr. J vs. Bird. It released on a multitude of systems, but most played it on their NES. It seemed like a match made in heaven, right? These two rising global titans had come together, Jordan and Nintendo. Plus you had uber-popular Larry Bird involved too. It was a disappointment. In comparison to Double Dribble or GBA Basketball, it seemed like a step backward. It was stilted and felt a lot more like earlier Atari efforts than something fresh. It did feature a dunk contest and a three-point shootout, but it was overall a mediocre effort. In fact, EA and Jordan would team up for multiple games, which had varying quality, but none were the huge hits they seemed they should be. After some time, Jordan stopped appearing in video games altogether, but that's a topic for another time. Instead, Nintendo and Jordan had to be content with dominating in their separate directions. Now, you live in the present, so you are aware that this monopoly of market influence did not last forever. Nintendo and Jordan both remained prosperous, but as others started to catch on, that faded a bit. Soon, one of the two icons would face a challenge of competition that would throw them in a dogfight that they still deal with today. Here's a hint. It wasn't Michael Jordan.